We are recording the session now. Yeah. So no, what I was saying is that it's been amazing. These 5 episodes. Last was with Mo, and he talked about the England's World Cup journey. And we were thinking about, from one extreme to another is always a very interesting discussion point. A country who has had legacy for, who was kind of birthplace of the game, and their journey after years of toil to win the World Cup, ODI World Cup. And what about the other extreme, where we're talking about countries who are trying to make a mark? What's happening there? So that was, quite frankly, we were thinking, and I'm very, very, very. It's a pleasure to introduce Cameron to you. Some of you, I'm sure, know of Cameron or know him. But I've had some very interesting discussions, and I will hand over the baton to him in a bit. But somebody who I thought had some very interesting views to the game, thinks about the game in a very, very first principle basis and implements it. I thought it would be very interesting to hear him, how he has gone about in his coaching methodologies, especially working with nations who doesn't have that legacy, right? I compare this to India, where we missed a lot of revolutions, if you will. And suddenly we had a telecom revolution, and we actually leapfrogged quite a bit to move forward, right? And truly, truly democratize, if you will, our nation. And telecom had a major role because of access of information and so on and so forth. So what is that leapfrog which can happen, which will help us globalize? Had the pleasure of talking to Zubin a lot about this, or globalization, how it's important that it cannot be just few nations playing. So, thanks to Zubin also, that got me thinking that how can we have a session which actually can give a perspective what's happening outside the confines of 5, 6, 7 nations. Yeah. So that's the whole thought, and I will. So again, a simple case study and a trivia, again backed by straight bad data. It's amazing that we can keep going at it. We have enough interesting case studies. It just takes actually 5 or 7 minutes of discussion with Navneet, who's the chief sports analyst. What can be presented, and we come up with some thoughts. We come up with the number crunching, so it's actually nice. Then we have a 30 minutes of what Cameron, I thought that could be a good session, which is decision sciences, right? How do we make decision in cricket field, and how do we train people to make decisions in cricket field? Because it is about problem solving at the end of it. And then, as we discussed in open house. Navneet, next slide, please. A case study. This is an interesting one. I think a bit of it has been discussed in some time, but this is very, very focused on a particular aspect. What you see on the 2 images on the right side of the 2 images is a player who went about some changes, and on day 7, what was his batting? If you compare with day 1 and day 3. So if you, Navneet, if you can point the mouse, the first image is day 1. The third image is day 3. And the day 7 image is the second and fourth. What was happening for this player was, forget the angle, the degrees, and so on and so forth. When he was bringing the ball, the bat path to play, especially in the offside, what was happening is that he was cutting across the line. He was not behind the line of the ball, intended direction of the shot. Not the ball, sorry, the intended direction of the shot for long enough time, which basically means that he was cutting across and he was behind the intended direction of the shot for a very short duration. The coach was working with him, right? Realized that through this visual that he was actually cutting across, and you can see this in this on the first image, right? The bat angles almost remain the same if you compare, but he cut across at the last moment to hit the ball. His impact speed was around 8. And again, there was a bit of improvement in day 3. And then he started coming more behind the line of the ball. Obviously, something which I've spoken to some of you, to Troy, to Zubin, that obviously it cannot go behind to the fine leg, obviously. That doesn't make sense because he will be completely constrained in terms of levers. But if you are behind the line of the intended direction of the shot, which I think everybody kind of proposes, there's a definite improvement in objective data for him. So his timing, 18% higher timing index and 28% higher from day 1 to day 7, just coming more behind the line, the 60 extra milliseconds behind the line, right? Uh, Again, this was not just data, and this was looking at the visual, the 3D rendering, and analyzing somebody's batting, right? And then working with the player to tell him, and he devising his own method, if you will, and seeing whether it's working for him or not, right? It was an interesting thing. So I thought I'll share this with you. In the similar lines, what we did, and Zubin, we took your point completely that averages are not the best way, and I think averages is the most ugly statistical metric. If you last time I think you mentioned that, and I couldn't agree more. But the only advantage of averages is that it gets people thinking and gets hopefully to get into detail of each and every player, each every session. So that was the whole intent, and that's the whole intent. So if you go to the next slide, right? So when you're playing in the offside, and this, I think one of the sessions, it was, I think, Rajasthan Royal session where the bat angle has been discussed. There are two, just to familiarize with you some metrics, right? Some of you are new here. If you see, this where the mouse pointer is pointing, that is the highest bat lift angle, which basically means just before the downswing starts, the bat position and the angle vis-a-vis the pitch direction. Okay, so that we call as the highest bat lift angle. We analyze for players across elite players, right? Players who are playing at a professional level and above, right? When they're playing aggressive shot, when there's an intent to play, when the highest bat lift angle is around 19 degrees, right? The swing speed ranges from 30 to 45. Yeah. And when the swing speed of 45 to 70, when the swing speed actually increases, we see the highest bat lift angle actually become 15 more when you're playing in the offside. Yeah. What will be very different, and I will show that in the next slide, when you're playing in towards the leg side, it will be a bit wider because it will be again behind the line of intended direction of the shot. So actually that case study, we tried to put it in the gamut of data of roughly around whatever thousands of shots, right? And we saw that when your bat lift is more behind, if you will, intended direction of where you want to hit, you have a better power, 50% higher swing speed while playing with 4 degrees close angle difference. Yeah. So again, this is where my rhetoric point comes in. We don't know what are the levers for you to improve the player's game. But what we know is if you can't measure, it will be somebody's subjective analysis versus somebody else's, right? So if you can put this data to play to it, right, there will be some interesting thing coming along, and hopefully we'll be able to take the game forward. Thank you. Naveed, next. Again, Cameron, he's a coach education specialist in sports in Australia, multiple sports, rugby, cricket, worked with host of different bodies, ICC, Cricket Australia, and so on and so forth, and works with a lot of coaches in developing the program. Before I hand it over to him, if you can move to the next slide. When I was talking to Cameron about how, and I was learning from him how he has gone about, developing his program with associate nations and the likes. And we were discussing, and I think there was a tube light moment, right, Cameron? Where what we are thinking about is actually helping them take right decisions, on the spot decisions. Something, again, a lot of people in this group has talked about. It is about decision making. It is about solving problems. And if you put a framework, and me coming from my consulting corporate background, and I love this triangle approach to it, right? If you think about decision science, and this is something which I've learned in my INSEAD program, and I could easily correlate to what Cameron was saying, that there are 3 pillars to it, or 3 vertices. One is why, the objective of what you're doing. If we don't know the objective, our decisions typically are very, very vague, and it's based on options, option A versus option B, rather than aligning to why we want to do what we want to do. Objective, the fundamental objective of what we're trying to do is so important, right? Why? Second is, something again I learned and I wanted to share and see if you can resonate with you guys, is that if you think about any decisions in your life, right? The canvas, if you make a parallel to that of a carpet, yeah, that's the decision-making canvas. And you are standing on one side of that carpet. And hence you have the complete information of that side or that area within that carpet. You have all the information, all the troughs, all the crests of that carpet, which is your decision-making canvas. But you as a human being cannot cover the entire carpet by yourself. It's not possible. If you want spotlights of each and every area of decision-making canvas, the carpet, you need to have those different spotlights. And then you will know what you're playing with, and hence your ability to form decisions is far more mature and far more objective, right? And for that to happen, we need to have right communication. We have always in our lives, we have said, oh, that was a problem of miscommunication. And that has happened in my life n number of times, because we have not probably taken that communication piece very, very seriously. With this communication, it's a whole big piece. We all know, we have gone through it, but something which I enjoy quite a bit. If Navneet can go to the next slide, and I'll leave it at that. And I would like you to look at this one, and I'll read it for you. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said. I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. It's convoluted. Take your time. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you have heard is not what I meant. Communication is two ways. I say something in my context. Somebody else who has a very different context, where a fight with his girlfriend, he's listening to you. He'll have a very different context to what he is in. And then he will assume that this is what I'm saying, and I'll assume that this is what you understand. And that's where the problem lies. And hence our decision-making gets a bit marred. I didn't want to talk about cricket. That's not my area, but I thought this is a very generic framework for decision-making in general. Thought I would share with you something which I have learned. But in this context, I'll hand it over to Cameron, and I would love to hear from Cameron how you have enabled decision-making in your way, and does the three triangle framework fits into what you are doing? Cameron, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gagan. Really appreciate it, and thanks everyone for joining in. It's actually really interesting, because the differentiator that we can make is through our decisions, and the decisions that we empower our players to make. And the greatest data that you as a coach can receive is what's happening in front of you. What decisions are your players making? And then it really helps you sort of start to pull apart what's the current state of your players, what's the desired state you'd like to get your players to, and what are your gaps. So to start to inform you with regards to what you require and what your team requires or your players require, we really need to do this gaps analysis with regards to what can they do, what can't they do, and then how do we then start to fill the gaps. So starting with that, I also think there's a piece that often gets missed, is that we start to make these, or do our assessment pieces on players, athletes, out of context of what it looks like in competition and in games. And it becomes very dangerous, because we can, in a very sterile environment, we can perform extremely well if we don't have the same issues, pressures, decisions that we have to make in the heat of the battle when you're performing. So I was very, very lucky and fortunate in my time with cricket that I got to work a lot around Australia, and I saw a lot of things around Australia, and I felt, I don't want to say you feel like a fraud, but you've been given all the tools to be able to then go out into the public all around the country and start to deliver coach education in the greatest from a really good understanding or background of the game. The people you're engaging with understand the game intimately. They've got an opinion on it. The facilities are usually pretty good. And you can sort of get down into the nitty-gritty of the game very, very quickly, rather than go through this introduction piece where you've got to sort of take them on the journey. When I first started with Cricket Australia, I found that was a wonderful platform for us. But then I was taken out of my comfort zone with regards to the philosophies of what we were trying to achieve with regards to getting growth and starting to link what we were doing into our pathways systems. Is that what if we were coming from a perspective of an area where the facilities weren't fantastic? The history of the game isn't embedded in tradition, and they haven't seen it for 100 years. So they don't quite know what it looks like. How do we then get our coaches to then create the right environments to give us the outcomes that we're looking for? And I found it refreshing when I started to work through the Southeast Asia Pacific, and particularly working through areas like Fiji, Vanuatu, Samoa, Papua New Guinea, and then Japan. Because what I tended to find was all the coach education experience that I was bringing into those areas were tested because of the sheer rawness of what was in front of me and the lack of knowledge. However, that created some amazing opportunities. And that's where this all started for me, with regards to really getting an understanding of how we can help support and grow sport, confidence and competence, but also how we can release as coaches to empower the players to give us the data that we need to then make really core decisions on how we support the teams and the athletes in front of us. I'd like to sort of, before we go on to the first slide, I'd like to just preface the talk by saying people often talk about game sense, and I know that it's a term that's bandied around. I want to give it a little bit of a different narrative for this session. So what I would like to do is, instead of saying game sense, which implies that we're talking about bells and whistles and the circus coming to town, let's shift that a little bit and let's start driving some really key accountable words that we as coaches can take on board. So if you shift the word game and move that to context, how are you providing context for the skills to be tested in what environment? So shift the word of game to context, and then I want you to shift the word of sense to purpose. What's the purpose that you're trying to provide? What's the environment you're trying to provide? And how do you want them to use the technique, the skills that you're putting into context? How do you want to then drive that to then get the decisions that you need to understand what intuitively you're working with? Who's making good decisions? Who's making poor decisions becomes so much more powerful for you as a coach if you're finding that outside of the heat of the battle. If you're creating those environments at training, and you can start to highlight, these are the strengths of these people, these are the weaknesses, and this is what we need to work on. So if you look on that as being an ideal, all of a sudden you can start to put sessions in place that don't just talk about the skill in isolation. You can start to talk about genuinely developing not just players as individuals, but teams and their roles that they play when you go into battle. So I just thought I'd preface the chat by just putting that up front, is that let's look at that a little bit differently, because the more the coach takes the accountability for the context and the purpose of your sessions and your seasons and your season plannings, the more this will start to make sense to you with regards to how you can implement and make a difference and make a change. And this is what I learned working with the Southeast Asia Pacific, is that the minute you can drive accountability to yourself, rather than having to be the didactic holder of all the knowledge of what the session you're going to provide, and everyone becomes linked to you by you being the holder of knowledge. All of a sudden you're pushing the knowledge out, and you know what you're looking for. You know what your markers are, because you're the one who set the purpose of the session. So I just thought I'd start off with that little precursor to get us moving. If we can have the first slide up, please. This is a big day for these boys. This is the Japanese under-19 team. Now, they won the final by default in Sano, in Tochigi in Sano. These young fellows I'd worked with over quite a long period of time. We're talking probably 5 to 6 years. They're a wonderful group of kids. And when I say kids, I mean kids. These are the under-19s. But what you're looking at there is the majority of them are 15, 16 years old, playing in an under-19 World Cup in South Africa against the world's best. So you've seen a team that's come from Japan not even having a cricket program to, in a very, very short period of time, having an under-19 side, which most of them will be ready to play in the next under-19 World Cup, that has thought of how they play the game differently and how do they bring their own flavour to what they're seeing on the international stage. And it's a really rich story, because the way that this was all developed, again, I came in bits and pieces. They've got some a good infrastructure there. They've got a group of people that sort of believe in how they sort of develop players. And I literally was the fly in, fly out coach that turned up twice a year and did work with their national squads, both men's and women's. Worked with their juniors coming through the system, like some of these fellows. And you can see that young fellow, the short one in the front there, when I first got to Japan, was a 10-year-old who just loved leg spin. He's a little leg spinner. And he used to, every single time I used to come, he used to spend hours with me playing different games to then hone his skills to become a quality little leg spinner. Now, he developed himself. None of this is on me, just so you all know. Please don't think I'm sitting here saying that I developed these people. I didn't. What I did was I provided the right environment when I went over there. And when I did the trainers sessions, we started to work on how can we get these kids to be thinking about the game and not just about a technique. So that became very, very big. The other reason why this picture was interesting, this picture came up to me, it was sent to me by one of the fellas, and they said, we're in the World Cup, we've qualified, which was an amazing thing for Japan cricket. And they asked me if I could come over and do a session specifically targeted at these young boys. And when we got there, we sat down and we discussed prior to the sessions and what did they want to get out of it. So we started to really then focus on what was the purpose. What are we trying to achieve here? And the truth is, there was under no illusion that this team was going to win the World Cup. No one was thinking that Japan was going to go there and take the world by storm and win the thing. But they wanted to make sure that they were going to suck the life out of everything, or they were going to get everything they could out of this tournament. What were they going to learn? So if that was the purpose, is that this was the learning curve, yes, they wanted to be competitive. How could we create the environment that the information that these kids were seeing in South Africa could be processed in their mind so that they could make sense of what they were seeing and learn from it, to then help not just them develop, but also what could they bring back to Japan to then help elevate other people around them. So we needed to create this opportunity for them to become very good at self-assessment. We had to understand, give them the ability to process information, because they were going to see for the very first time in their lives a 6'4" fast bowler coming in, putting something on the deck at about 132, 135k an hour, and they're going to have to deal with that. The way that they wanted to prepare for it was with bowling machines, bowling in the slot and them trying to hit it back over its head. We all know what that's like. We can all hit a bowling machine back over a bowling machine's head if we know where the ball's going to land. We also knew that the teams that they were playing were going to bowl 4 at the heart and then 1 full and straight. And that was going to be the information that they needed to navigate. So that's where we started here. That was the learning, was we needed to provide context and purpose for these young men. And we also had to create this environment where we were going to empower them to become decision makers, process the information, come up with coping strategies, and how do they then learn from the experience and not be scarred from the experience. I want you to keep an eye on the fellow who's holding the cup up. There's a person that's sitting to his right-hand side, Neil. I'll talk about Neil later in the chat, but keep Neil in the back of your mind as we move on. When I landed in Japan with these young fellas, we did a session that they'd never done before. And we started to work on how are we going to change the narrative and make them think more about the game and make them think about every single training session that they do. Because keeping in mind, this isn't a squad that's full time. These kids are at school, they're at work, and they're scattered all around the country. How are we going to provide them with the things that they needed to be beneficial when they hit the dirt in South Africa? So we went on a bit of a process. And the first session, I'll get you to change to the next slide, please. The next session became about this. It was the very, very first time ever that this team had started to look at how they plan for a session. Before, it's been quite didactic. So it was the coach that was actually telling them what they were going to do, and the sheer skills and people that they had in the team, they owned it themselves. They didn't know how they fit together as a team. And we had a very interesting session here where we started to talk. We started with fielding, and we put up on this blackboard at the start of the day, we put up a field and we said, right, can you guys pick the perfect field for right-hand batsmen, openers? How would you select your field positions? And it was very interesting what we saw. We saw we saw a fine leg. We saw a third man go back. We saw a long on and a long off. And we saw boundary riders on both the offside and the onside. So I asked, where does that tell your bowler that they want to bowl? What does that actually mean to your bowler? Because if you're bowling full and straight and outside off stump, why have we got a fine leg in? And we started to really test and prod and poke with these guys with regards to why are they doing what they've done. And the whole idea of their game was to protect runs first, look for wickets second. So they went in with that attitude. That said, their field was so defensive that they were setting that runs were everywhere. You could find runs anywhere on the paddock you wanted to. It was available everywhere because they were trying to protect rather than trying to actually play the game of cricket. So we started to ask them what are some of the questions they needed to ask. And we went through the bowling. So who's batting? Who's bowling? We started to ask, what is the intent? And so every single time we went through what's our intent, we started to work on this is the purpose for our how we set this field. This is the intent. So then what does that then tell and inform the bowler? So take this, I'll take back and review that. This may not be new to a lot of you, but the difference is that from learning from playing in the nets and from training in the nets, what we're actually doing is we're trying to teach the game out of context to what we're trying to get them to perform in. What decisions do you want to see to form the plan for development? What is it that you want them to start to see? So we started to work on the what, the how, and importantly, the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? This session here was a really powerful one for these kids who then started to understand the decision-making process of what they're doing. the implications. For the first time, they started to work on how are we going to target batsmen and bowlers, or how are we going to start to target fielders? And they started to work on how are they going to get their running between the wickets so that ones are twos, twos are threes. Do they need to score boundaries? And it was one of the very, very first times, even though they've been playing international cricket in the Southeast Asia Pacific, we started to make them think about the game as a series of one ball battles. Every ball is a battle and you're in the game. The beauty of coming up with this realization is that the minute the very first ball is bowled, how many times do we see someone let a ball go on the very, very first ball of a game, and yet at the back end of it, they need 3 runs off the last ball, 4 runs off the last ball? Now, I'm not saying letting the ball go was the wrong decision. I'm saying it's impacted the whole end of the game. So we need to have people in there with making the right decisions for the right reasons, to be building totals, to be protecting totals with the intent of winning. The 3 words that these guys came up with, and to be 100% honest with you, I was basically the only English speaker, and there's probably 3 other people that spoke English. So a lot of it was translated. So I had to get better at the way that I had non-verbal cues. I had to make sure that we had the heads nodding, that people were understanding. The 3 words that they built, that they wanted to have as their mantra moving forward, was we will manipulate the situation to provide control because we're going to play with intent. And the intent is the team meeting before the game or the training sessions before the game. This is the way we want to play. As coaches and as developing coaches, or whether you're in a community or you're in a performance team area, making sure you're very, very clear on those things there gives people the license and the freedom to play the way that they naturally would play. If people don't understand the roles that they play, if they don't understand, what their position is, what should they do in certain situations, what we end up with is confusion and people playing a different game. This provided alignment. So we started to work through what is the process that we're looking for as we're moving forward. The process that we sort of lent on was every single ball that they were going to face when they were either in training or in playing. I wanted every single player to assess the situation. So assess was the first. What's the match position? What do we need? How many runs do we need? Are we chasing? Are we setting a target? What's the match situation? Then gather the information. What's the environmental factors? What's the contributing factors? Where's the fields placed? Who's bowling? Who's batting with me up the other end? Where is the field set? Where can I squeeze my runs? What do I need to do on this next ball? The next one is execute the skill. Apply your craft to execute the skill to give you your outcome. And then that can also be premeditated, but it can also be the instinctive decision that you've made to execute the skill. The next piece is your decision. Now, this is both conscious and instinctive. So if you've gathered the information, you understand where the game's at, you understand what you need to do, you then have to make a decision, and then you're starting to put the pressure on that person to make the decision, the right decision, more often. You then recover, give yourself a little bit of time, clear your mind, and then you repeat. So that recovery step is one that's often missed, but it becomes crucial. Because in a 50-over game with 300 balls, no one can stay focused for 300 balls and not get that downtime. It'd be too draining. That was the process that we took these people through. We knew that they were going to be faced with, heavy fire when they got to South Africa. So they trained with that mindset of that's what we're going to do. So every single game, every single training session became a learning opportunity for them, because we'd shifted the paradigm from skills only to skills in context to how we're going to measure in performance. And we put the responsibility back onto the players. So we started to create these environments at training where we started to pull out these key decision-making areas where we could then assess what decisions they're making, under what pressure, what was the outcome, and then how did we want to reflect on that and work with them to either, one, reinforce that that's the decision we're looking for, or two, how do we then throw more scenarios at them, keep putting them into that pressure situation to get a different result, and then unpack that. Because it's interesting. I often talk to coaches about this moment. We all know it. A batsman's just played a terrible shot, and that's where the coach ends up, with their heads in their hands in their head. We should never be there. We should know that everything's got a calculated risk to it, but we should know enough about our players, because we're informed through what we see in the environments we create at training, to then understand what their temperament, what their decision making is, and what their process is at the back end of a session or in the heat of a battle. And then the reflection point. What do we have to reflect on? What did we do well? What didn't we do well? What are the gaps? What do we need to develop? And what does utopia look like with regards to this team developing? So each one of the sessions that we pulled together, not just the sessions I did, this was the sessions that we left with them, was how do individuals react to the situations? How do people receive the information that's in front of them? What are they seeing and how are they assessing? Keeping in mind that what we see from the side is very different from what people are seeing at 135k an hour, and what's the instinctive decision that they're making. So rather than getting up someone or getting angry at someone for making a poor decision on the field, unpack it, put them under that pressure at training, and start to understand, why did you make the decision you made? Now, I'm not saying say it to them in those words. I'm saying create the environment to make it happen, and maybe you'll learn a little bit more about the player and why they made that decision. What is your focus area for development then falls out of that? So you can set up individual player plans. You can set up team plans. You can set up your season planning based on what you're seeing in front of you, of what's your current state, what's the desired state, and how do we then fill that up? What that also informs the coach of is it's the importance of understanding risk v reward. And I'll give you an example with the Australian cricket team last summer. I'm going to forget the game, I'm sorry, but Troy will remember it well. Is that I remember a run-out opportunity. I think it was at the MCG. Pattinson moved quickly to the ball. He's left the ground. He's thrown the ball in midair. He's run a person out, and I think it was either Pattinson or Cummins. They've run a person out, and there was a person backing up behind them. The risk v reward. The Australians were on top. They were looking to take another wicket, and they didn't wait to set himself in the field. He didn't wait for the perfect scenario. He didn't dive on the ground, get to his feet and throw. He took the risk, and there was risk v reward, which we got the wicket. It's important that that's the sort of thing that you're pushing out to your players at your training session, at your environment, at your learning environment. And then how do you then mitigate the risks? And so the profiling of your players becomes very important. Who plays what role? And an example for that, if you look at soccer as a game, you've got your goalkeeper who is very risk averse. They're looking at cutting down angles, and they're looking at organising people in front to mitigate the risks of a ball going in the goals. You don't want that same mindset from your striker up the other end, who's looking to create the angles, to create the opportunities, to get that 1 second to have a go. What players are you going to empower and put into key positions so that you're starting to get your outcomes with regards to the risk v reward? Who's your game changer? Where are they? And how do you get them into the game? All of this development work you can do at training can give you the data and the information you need to start to make those key decisions. And you provide them to your captain. Who should bowl when? Who should field where? Who's good to come in as a partnership in a batting pair? Who's going to give me the outcome I'm going to sort of need to get us through this game? With that information, with a coach arming yourself with, you put yourself in a much better position to be in control of a game, to manipulate it, because you're playing with intent. The minute we take cricket out of context and make it about raw skill, we remove the opportunity for these key decisions that need to be made. The decision making is so crucially important to what you see in performance out there. Now, we talk about the highest level. Think about what happens on the weekend. Think about the intrinsic motivation that you can place into a young cricketer coming through your pathways, or just to play on your Saturday morning, Sunday morning. If they turn up every single week and we focus on, we're in the nets and we're going to focus on a batting session that you're just going to hit balls for 20 minutes. They get out 10 times, it doesn't matter because you're in the nets, there's no consequence. So it's not in their mind that, hold on, I'm out. They just keep going. No one actually wins the battle. The bowlers can bowl anywhere. The batsman can hit anywhere. It's not really in context of the sport. And then on the weekend, they go out and they get out first ball. We've made the game about one aspect of the sport, one aspect. And their one driver was to bat. Keep perpetuating that, and it becomes about not getting out. It doesn't become about playing the game. Introducing these concepts in context with the purpose of getting varied outcomes provides intrinsic motivation to all of your players to be in the game every single ball. They then start to assess the situation. They all start looking at the scoreboard. They all look at the field rather than putting their hands in their pockets, putting their heads down and just waiting for the next one to go and just hoping the ball comes near them, or sometimes doesn't come near them. And it becomes really, really important, as I say, from the perspective of the coach, that they get that information. We can get that next slide, please. This is my most hated picture from Japan. This is the one that I try not to ever give to anyone. But the reason it's so bad is because none of those people there speak English at all. That's the women's captain throwing the ball to me, and everyone else just standing there behind me. The reason I don't like it is because it goes against my entire philosophy of getting so much action in the field and getting them involved. But because I didn't have the verbal cues that could help us set the scene up, I had to set everything up with a demonstration of what it looked like. We talked really early in the session about how it taught me and I grew through these experiences. And I promise you, I learned more out of these experiences than they certainly did. Because what I found was what I was trying to communicate wasn't what they were picking up. And Gagan's thing at the beginning of the session is a very, very, very powerful message. What we think we're saying isn't what they're hearing. So some of these activities that we're putting in to get a certain outcome looked nothing like how I thought they would, because there was a breakdown in the interpretation of what it would look like. So I had to become very, very skilled in making sure that my purpose was clear, my intent was right, and we put it in the right context so I could get all the data I needed to then take the next step. And as I say, I literally hide it, but I think it's a really good context for this session, is that that's where I was at, is that I had to then do everything through demonstration rather than the other way around. I told you to keep your eye on that fella at the in the very first slide, the fella who was off to the right of the person holding the cup up. The reason I bring Neil up, out of all the under-19 World Cup when they went, I've chatted to all the boys since then, and you know, they were telling me what an amazing experience it was, how they learnt. And when I said that, when they all told me that they've all faced, that they'd never faced 135 kilometres an hour bowling before, they'd certainly never faced it from the height of 6'4" coming at them. But the beauty of what they came back to me with was exactly what we were talking about now. I asked them what they did the very first ball, and I won't tell you the exact response that they gave me, but they said something around it frightened them a lot to the point they had a movement, if that's the nice way that I can put it, which I sort of get. I'm the same, right? We're all the same. But what they did was, rather than anchor back to what they've always known, what they did was their coping mechanism told them that they had to change the environment for them to start to get on top. The fella next that I was talking about at the first slide scored a 50 in the last game against one of the top tier nations. He scored 50 runs, didn't score many other runs during the tournament, but it made me even happier that he scored it late in the tournament. Here's a fella that didn't have scar tissue. He was now thinking about his game. In a very, very short period over there, he worked on coping mechanisms to then start to work on how he was going to score runs against bowling that he had never seen before. There was an Indian bowler there in the under-19s that cleaned up. He was brilliant. But they all found a way. Not only did he score a 50, another young fella scored a 49, and another one scored a 44. And if we look at what development looks like and where these kids have come from that ground there that doesn't even have a turf wicket, that's on a synthetic deck, to them then playing over in South Africa and them being able to accelerate their development because we empowered them with the right mechanisms to go through, that's not working, I need to change. That's not working, I need to change. Then they go and work on it, they come back and they try it, rather than the coach saying, here's what you need to do. You need to have more of that, let's get in, we'll do more throwdowns. Creating that environment, providing them with context, gave us some amazing results of growth in this developing nation. What I can draw from that for you is that as you're setting up your sessions, and there's multiple ways that you can elevate this, start this, or start to test your own coaching and put yourself in an uncomfortable position. Because again, we all love to go back to our comfort zones. We've got our conscious bias, we've got our unconscious bias to doing what we feel safe with. There's mechanisms that you can put in place as a coach to then drag yourself out of your comfort zone, to then empower the people in front of you. And your results will be mind-blowing to you. So just in a basic summary, understand the game and how you want the players to perform at any level. Wherever you're coaching, really understand what is your philosophy and what are you espousing. What do you want to see? Understand the difference between skills development and skills application in pressure. That context becomes everything. So if you can see someone who's playing the perfect cover drive, the perfect forward defensive, the perfect pull or hook shot, that's brilliant. Are they doing it under pressure? And how are you measuring it in performance? There's a massive importance on your session and your season planning. What's your current state? What's your desired state? How do you get them there? And then remember, be agile and adaptable to shift where required. Because things are going to come up that are going to throw you and you're going to think, I'm on the wrong track now. Be adaptable. Play what's in front of you. Do exactly what we're asking of our players. And the big one, the one we often forget. Remember to reflect and remember to celebrate. Reflect on the performances, reflect on your players, and reflect on where you came from and where you've come to. Because the minute you can start to do that and celebrate, coaching becomes so much more rewarding than putting your equipment in the bag, walking down to the nets, and just watching people play down there and just hoping that they're developing. Thank you very much. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Cameron. We open up to obviously some questions. Guys, I have few, but Troy, you wanted to say something?
No, that's it. I'm just listening. I have a couple of questions will come in.
How is it, Troy? Who was that?
Cummings.
It was Cummings. Yeah, I thought it was Pattons. It was Cummings. That was a brilliant piece of field.
We use it quite regularly in team meetings. That one, we don't do the Nathan Lyon one during the Ashes in England, but we'll definitely use Cummings.
Exactly.
Yeah, I liked the way that you put game sense into context and purpose. I thought that really solidified some really good way to sort of sum up game sense. So I really enjoyed that analogy, mate. Well done.
Yeah, good. Cheers, Troy.
And before people jump in, I have one question. And typically, I've seen when you, and I'm not at all talking from a cricket field perspective, but I've been part of corporate running businesses and so on and so forth. I think the journey is far more rewarding than the final output, what you get, because output doesn't have the context, right? So in that blackboard which you drew, the long, what was the turning point there, if let's say in that context, right? Which got people to understand what's the intent? Because, sometimes, and I've seen that very often, because you've gone through the journey, you don't even know what was that, right? And then it becomes a bit of English. But if you could share with some examples about what was the turning point, that they could understand that their role, what was their intent, and hence how they have to adapt to all the...
A really good question, Gagan. And what actually happened was we had everyone in the room and we divided them up into pairs. And we made them sit away from each other. And then we gave them 4 questions to answer. What sort of team do they see themselves as? So what do they want to be known for? We asked them, what are the critical factors of batting? What are the critical factors of bowling? And what were the critical factors of fielding? And when they all came back together, we had 6 different responses from the teams. Like there was, I think there was 14 in the room, 6 completely different perspectives. And the minute we said, well, hold on, that's great, we've all got a perspective. It doesn't help us when we're out there as a team and we all think our role's different. So what we need to do is we need to come up with, what is it? What is our core that we're all going to work for and that we believe in? And that's where we started to really drag this, right, well, as batsmen, we want to be known as dependable. We want to be known as, scorers. We want to be known as the quickest between the wickets. I said, right, let's put that in there. How do we get there? What do you want to be known in the field for? They started talking about, we want to never drop a catch. And we're not an easy, we don't let easy singles go past us, that we cut the singles down. Because they believed if they cut the singles down, they'll win the game. So we started to go through that process of, we've got all these different perspectives in here, but this is how we're also playing. Because you're from different areas. So you come with different things. What is the focus for this team? And that's how we sort of came up with a really focused intent for that side and for the development moving forward.
Interesting. Thank you. Guys, any questions?
I had a question, Cameron. Some of these developing teams, we had a little bit of experience ourselves. I think Binod is also here with the Nepal team.
Yes.
But my question to you was that you were able to build this team with the identified players which went to do the tournament. So, 2-step question. One is that how you were able to put the process in place to identify the right kind of players who got into this squad. You will obviously have a challenge over there as well, because communication, like you said, it was one of the biggest challenge out there to figure out how they're going to respond to your questions.
Yes.
And the second one was that in that journey, when you all won that cup, there are times when an individual player goes to a vulnerable situation. And there is a doubt. There is a question. There is a doubt about his own abilities. While you have identified in different sections of the game, like the batsmen and the bowlers and the fielders, you will have one of those personalities who will have those situations. And was there anyone who courageously came forward was able to communicate? Because time and again, we see a lot of the associate countries, communication gap is huge.
Massive problem. Yeah. First of all, I must admit, as far as the identification process went for the teams, I didn't have a lot of oversight. Well, I did. I had vision on it, but not oversight over who we were getting. But every year I go over there, as I say, twice a year, I got to see the talent all the time. We started to put just basic talent markers in place. And it's pretty unsophisticated over there because it's not like we've got, like Australia here, I mean, such a broad land base. What's the environment they're playing in, that sort of thing. We didn't really have that challenge there because we could get them all the players that we thought were of some talent or of some value, all could land in the one place on the one day where we could have a look at them. And so we started to put together what was our ideal of a team. So, working with the selectors over there, I've forgotten his last name, Thurgate. So started to work with him with regards to what are we actually looking for? What's our makeup that we want to look for? And we also focused on the fact we didn't want people to have one skill. You had to come with multiple skills. So you had to be, if you're a bat, you needed to field well. If you're a bat, or you needed to bowl. Or if you're a bowl, you needed to do something else. Because these one-dimensional players, exactly what you're talking about before, the minute a batsman who's only in the team to bat and they have a run of 3 very cheap outs, their confidence goes. And it's the only contributing thing they can give to the team. So we wanted to try and set them up for success with regards to, we know we need to develop holistic players and we need them to sort of have more than one string to their bow. As far as someone coming forward, look, that was probably there, especially in Japan, probably my biggest challenge, because they actually don't really, I mean, culturally, they didn't want to come forward and say too much to me. So what I did was I removed me from the situation on multiple occasions where we're having these sessions, and I removed myself and let their leadership team actually talk. So there was just some leaders within the group, and we let them have a go themselves with me out of the room, because realistically they see me twice a year. They sort of know who I am. They sort of don't. I'm just the guy who doesn't speak the language up the front. So we learned a lot from that. We learned a heck of a lot by removing ourselves, letting their team leadership, talk amongst them. And then when we came back together, we had a really good idea of how we could support. And then we built a trust with them with regards to, we understand where the gaps are. We understand where you see you need development. We also see you need development here. And rather than us sitting down and telling them, what we do is we brought them out in the park in a really fun environment. So we had two or three different environments that we created these activities with. One is purely about fun. So fun, fun's such a generic term and people hate it when you use the word fun. But fun's about creating appropriate challenges for people. It's not about fireworks, it's about appropriate challenges for the environment. So we all know they're competitive people. So we put a really simple game, a really simple construct that they all knew what the rules were. And the truth is, it ended up being the game that they played before I came down to training. I'd turn up to training, they're already playing that game. That's the one that we create the really safe environment. It's competitive, as you know, any athletes coming together, very competitive. But if they did get out, they weren't upset because they could then just, they've had other roles to play in the game. But it gave them the safe environment to try something so that we weren't then saying, don't try that in the heat of the battle. Because if we came down and we saw those games, which we used to come down an hour before training to watch them, we saw people doing things that I hadn't seen before. I certainly couldn't teach them to do. And I sort of know the very first time David Warner played that switch hit, and I still remember the 2020 game against South Africa, where he played that switch hit and he's hitting sixes into the second tier. where people are going, well, I've never seen that before. That wasn't a fluke, and that wasn't something he just did that night. This is something that he's found the environment safe enough for him to trial these things. And from an Australian perspective, Steve Smith's the same. He's got a very unique style. They've had this environment where they've been asked questions and they've answered them their own way. So that's one way. The second activities that we put in is we're very, very clear on the purpose. We set the basic environment and then we let it go, and we saw where they took the games and activities. That gave us really good insight to where's their head at with regards to where do they see the competition, where do they see the development, what's their conscious bias, what's their unconscious bias. And the beauty of the rich data we pulled out of that is we then knew what their motivations were. So up front, we had the fun games that they can just play in a safe environment. The second one was a game that had constraints placed around it, but we started to let them develop, so we understood where their motivations were. And then the third was that's the stuff where we really put the pressure on, and we start to really, it's like the battle zone at the Centre of Excellence in Brisbane. That's where we start to really place the pressure on, and we want to see what decisions are you going to make now. 10 balls to go, 30 runs needed. You're batting with a number 7. You're a number 3. You're trying to hold an end up, and there seems to be fielders everywhere. So we would put constraints on where you could hit it, where you couldn't hit it. And all of a sudden seeing their mindset going from when we first started those games and activities to, I'm just going to blast, to the second mindset of, I'm actually know that I got balls up, up my sleeve. And we often talk about someone like an MS Dhoni, who, if MS Dhoni's in, I don't care how many runs you got on the board, if he's in with 10 overs to go, India are a chance. And that's how I always think. That's the mindset we sort of tried to introduce, is that stay in the game. While you're in the battle, you're in the game. So your confidence, yes, we did have people that wouldn't come forward. We just tried to create the safest environment as possible. We then tried to offer them a support out the back to gain trust so that we could then move forward with them.
That's very interesting. If we have to also take in that context of the local coaches out there, like you said, you were doing the visiting job.
Yeah.
For them also to embrace this kind of a style and approach, I mean, there has to be some challenges over there as well. I don't know much on that side, but we see a lot more on this side.
There is. Look, and over there, I was actually lucky, because the truth is, as we were saying at the beginning, is they're not steeped in cricket tradition. So they don't actually know what traditional coaching looks like. And when I say traditional coaching, it's probably unfair. They don't know what the other sort of coaching looks like. So then I come in and I say, here's a way of coaching. Did you see how these people are having fun? Do you see them develop? These are the skills we're looking for. They pretty much bought in because they didn't really know any other way. What does happen, though, is that we get Australian coaches going over there with the best of intentions that might try and anchor them back. That's okay. Again, it gives them perspective. But the beauty is when the Australian coaches do go over there, we've got a group of people over there who are thinking for themselves, and they're thinking about how they can develop themselves. So if they do go back to that net session, for example, they're conscious of how many times they get out. They're conscious of where they hit the ball. The bowlers are very conscious of, where the ball's bouncing. Are they bowling full? Are they bowling short? Do they need to, are they practicing their change-up? So they're very, very conscious of developing themselves.
Thanks, mate. Thanks a lot for that insight.
Pleasure.
Just to elaborate on what Monty was talking about, we face quite a lot of challenges, especially in the associate world here. So just to further enhance, further perspective on your, further thoughts on your Japan endeavor, how difficult was it for you? So at one hand, you are dealing with the players and their mindset. You're trying to develop them and bringing them to a level where you thought that they will be competitive enough. But then to integrate it with the thought process of the cricket board, and that's one challenge, is the challenge that we face a lot. We bring in a program, we bring in a elaborated program where we think that that's going to work for the boys, but then to convince it to the cricket board or the people who do not understand the message exactly the way you want them to, how difficult was it for you to deal with it?
Japan's probably a poor example in the fact that, to be honest with you, they're open for anything, and they were pretty good, to be fair. And Alex Miyagi, who is the CEO over there, spent a bit of time in Australia, played for Japan himself. They were really open to it because the minute we started to work with them, they started to see results. They've also got a fellow over there called Alan Kerr, who's a really high quality operator from England, that was really supportive. He drove it, and Dougal Bedingfield, who's also, they're very much on board. So I must admit, I'd be lying to you if I said to you that was a hard thing. That was not too difficult. But I actually feel your pain, because here in Australia, that challenge is a constant. Is that do we coach one way? Do we coach this old way that we've always done, that has produced X, Y, and Z, or where's the tipping point? And people, again, they're comfortable with what they're comfortable with, and they're not comfortable with what they don't know. And so trying to change that mindset, I know that we went through a lot of a lot of time and effort back when I was at Cricket Australia. It'd be 6 years ago now, where we were trying to change that. And I also worked with Greg, with the Greg Chappell academies, where even on that small scale at some of his schools, where he's got different people in who are trying to look at this new way, trying to get the philosophy through, because it's hard for a coach who hasn't got the skills, who, I'm lucky, this is what I do. I do this for a living. Whereas new people, they want a textbook. They want to know, what is it that I'm going to do? And then no one can yell at me if I'm doing this. I'll be honest with you, if you can give me that answer, my friend, that's the silver bullet. If we can start to influence boards, that there's more than one way. And look, Cricket Australia's been great in the fact that they have morphed and they have changed. And where it was 10 years ago, it looks very different. Well, it certainly does from my perspective.
Absolutely, cannot agree with you anymore. Because the challenges that we face in our part of the world is we come through, like even for the coach educators program and all these things, we learn a certain way of doing things. Then it's very recent that we've all been starting to look at it very differently. There is your way of doing things. We moved on to producing clone cricketers to like more natural cricketers now. But
yes,
to instill the same thought process into the people who have been running the show for so long, it's been difficult. And that's why I was asking if you have some decision making charts which you could use to send the message across.
Binod, if I can jump in, believe me, the struggle you're having is not unique to you, your cricket, not to board. Anywhere administrators are involved, quite frankly, people like me, they sometimes happen to be a pain in the wrong side, and you need to bring them along, right? And the only way you get them along is ensure that agendas are aligned. You need to understand their agenda. I mean, I don't have to talk from a cricket point of view, but it's something which is always a struggle, every aspect of if you will, business. That's the way it is. Just conscious of time. I think there are a lot of people here who has worked with associate nations. It's lovely to hear their perspective on the challenges and the opportunities. Do you see what Cameron talked about resonated? Something similar you did, or you did something different? I know Monty has been working with Zubin. You have been working with, I think, US, if I remember right. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, unless somebody else wants to go, because if there's somebody other associate countries. Well, I just want to say, Cameron, fascinating stuff. Once you hear this and understand context and purpose in everything you're doing and the clarity that you've brought to this program, it's difficult to tell that there is some other way. This seems like it should be the only way. That's what I would say. Obviously, I've had similar experiences, and I can share all of that, but I think that will be for another forum. If somebody else has, my only challenge I found in these situations was that the difference in skill development. You could create a match environment. You could create, you could replicate everything, and we would do exactly what you did, which is have a batsman touch a ball and run every ball, and everything under the sun that you can think of. But how do you the challenge was, how do we keep skill them up? Like you said, in terms of just the lack of experience and skill was basically where the challenge was. And any anecdotes you want to share with the rest of the group on stuff that you maybe a few anecdotes that you saw where skill changed, and what assisted that skill to change, if you wanted to share that.
It's a great question. And that what you're talking about there, a really common challenge, and especially when you're working through your TID markers as people are coming through. How are you focusing on one skill at the talent level, but then how do you then also develop people who are new to the game or bringing them in? And what we tend to do, I've got a framework that I work to that it's not for everyone. This is just what works for me. Is that if I want someone to be able to perfect a skill, I show them what that skill looks like first up. So if you say you want them running every ball, I don't necessarily want them to run every ball. What I try and do is open an area up on the field where there is definitely not just a single, there's two runs. If they can hit it there, and make it very, very obvious by packing the other areas of the field and getting them to find a way to hit it into that area and give them a win, give them a short-term win, and give them a reason to hit it there. This is 6 runs here, and it's you get no runs if you hit it to any field around the other place, but 6 runs if you can hit it here. So you give them a very, very big carrot. And then the very first time is that they are able to succeed. And I'm talking about, if you're talking about a junior who's developing it that hasn't got the skills, set the environment yourself. So even if, again, I'm not a big believer in throwdowns, but if you have to put the ball into the area to then give them the win, so they get the feeling of what success looks like, and then they understand what a single looks like. If you can start them from success, the rest, it becomes easier, because then you can start to put the constraint and the pressure on, so that then the area that they're hitting to becomes smaller. It's no longer a throw down. They've now got 3 areas to hit, and it's now a bowler. And then the game or the activity is getting off strike, not on strike. And all of a sudden you've got this paradigm where you can keep putting the constraint on to then elevate them. Keeping in mind, scar tissue is a real thing. The minute that people become scarred and they become scared, they won't perform. So then if you can create the safe environment up front, a nice feeling of trust, I give them the win up front. I let them see what success looks like. And then from then on, we pile the challenges on. And I like to use the analogy of computer games. They don't make the toughest level of a computer game at level 1, because no one would ever get off level 1. They always make level 1 easy, and they make us feel good about ourselves, right? So you jump in, you can get through level 1 all right, you can get through level 2 okay, you can get to level 3, level 4 is a challenge, level 5 they're starting to ask different questions of me, level 6 becomes tough, level 7 I've got to ring a few friends, level 8 I'll work on, and level 9 is what keeps me awake at night. Because you've intrinsically motivated someone to be in and to be engaged in what you're doing.
Thanks, Cameron. There was, just to share a quick thought, when we were doing this program for T20 cricket, and had to select 20 boys from all over India to sort of learn T20 cricket, and we had 2 months to do it, and we sort of picked 20 guys who hadn't played hardball cricket. What we decided was, and we were supposed to play against Leicester, who had won the county championship, the first T20. This is 2006-07. So when I sat down to look at these guys and what was possible, and the difference in skill level, the only thing that I could come up was that we could do were 2 things: was change the pace of play and the element of surprise. And we based the entire context and the entire purpose behind pace of play and the element of surprise. So element of surprise meant, like you said earlier, everybody bowled in our team. When we actually played the match, we had 10 bowlers bowl in a T20 game. So that was the element of surprise. And pace of play just went right through batting, bowling, fielding. That's something we could control, something we could get fit. So every skill that we tried to develop, let's say take a single, we would try and do that on a beach to improve speed. We would do that on a hill to improve speed. We would try and reduce turning time for the second run. And what would that look like? What is the actual, how many seconds we can reduce, turning better. We would practice that on a hill. We would practice that on a beach. And then we just literally went through everything, like you said, with the context and with the purpose, right the way through. And the results, as you said, were fascinating. So totally agree with you. And thanks for this enlightening lecture.
Pleasure, no problems at all. And you make a really good point on you've got to play your style, your way. And again, I kept saying to the Japanese boys, but you could use any other team in context, is the fact that if you want to go and play against Australia and play the way that Australia coaches, I've got bad news for you. 100 years of history will tell you that you may struggle. Whereas if you play the way that you're going to play, you're going to learn what you can learn. You're going to take what you can out. I'm not saying you're going to beat them now, but you put yourself in a much better position based on what you've learned, your knowledge, your skill, and your experience to what the future looks like.
Super stuff, Cameron.
Fascinating. I think something which I also pick up in my space, where there's so much new coming up. Legacy sometimes goes out of the window, and how do you bring it all together? So, fascinating. Guys, I know we have 2:10 here in India. Any last questions or? Okay. Thank you so much, Cameron. Really, really appreciate. Fascinating to see how you are working with associate nations to come up with your own method. And, they don't have the legacy of 100 years, which is both pros and cons, as you know.
Absolutely.
Right? And you're working on their thing. Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much, team. It was, again, a pleasure having you guys. I know the lockdown is opening up in different parts of the world. I got a few messages that the coachings have started. So that's fantastic news for everybody. We'll see how this pans out, and then we'll plan the next session accordingly. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Cameron. Thanks, Cameron.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron, Gagan. Cheers, man.